Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning. We are here today for episode 2 of Keep Indiana Reading. We're going to be discussing chapter 2 of UDL and Blended Learning by Katie Novak and Catlin R. Tucker. My name is Melissa Wally, and I'm a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. Outside of Keep Indiana Learning, I work for Hanover Community Schools in Cedar Lake, and I'm an educational technology specialist by day. I also serve as a board member for HEC. I have now been in education for 25 years officially. So proud to say that. Can't believe it's been 25 years though.
Time flies when you're having fun, right, Melissa?
You're right about that.
I'm Diana Knox, and I too have been in education for 25 years. I'm a technology instructional specialist over at Clay Community Schools in Brazil, and I'm excited to be returning as a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. This is my 4th year, I believe. I too serve on the HEC board with Melissa and an army of other amazing people. And I also am proud to serve as an instructor advocate, and I co-lead the Indiana Canvas User Group. And I think we are ready to get started with chapter 2, Equity and Access.
So this chapter starts out with this whole conversation about a viral video. And I think just that phrase in itself is so interesting because it's not a new phrase now, but not too long ago, we wouldn't even know what a viral video was. Now I sound like I've been teaching for 25 years. But anyway, Jeff Bliss is a student and he's frustrated about his teacher. He's a high schooler who uses packets as her primary, it sounds like primary form of classwork and instruction. And so he hasn't been the strongest student and he really does not hold back. He doesn't mince words when he's telling his teacher that her friggin' packets are not working. And so he stands up, he's very animated, he's trying to engage the class. He's very upset. It doesn't seem like it's an act. It seems like it just kind of overtakes him and he stands up. Of course, there's a student in the class who decides to video it and it goes viral. So his suggestions that the teacher does something else and teaches the class are loud and clear. He does not like these packets. So he wasn't the strongest student. The packets weren't working for him, but I would guess that maybe they were helpful for some of the students. I don't know. That's, to be determined by, assumption. But one thing I have to say is by watching this video, whether you've seen it or not, is I think he was pretty brave to advocate for himself and for others, although it could have been definitely done in a different way, a less disruptive manner. The video does make me think of some other common teaching practices that are in place. And are there students that are frustrated by those practices? So I know I myself and other people, we've been in situations where whether it was a professional learning or, back in a college course, or if you're taking a current course where you get frustrated by the manner in which the information is being brought to you, and it can be frustrating. And if someone doesn't have the tools to keep that in or express it in a way that would be maybe appropriate, that can happen. Somebody can just boil over or shut down. We don't want either one of those things to happen. So how can we ensure that what we are doing meets the needs of all students, not just the majority that the packets are working for?
Yeah, and I think, we've all been there. I know I had a moment last week where I had a lot of things going on and I got myself in a situation where everything just burbled over and it was ugly. It wasn't my finest moment. And I think about this student in that capacity because he was struggling. This wasn't working for him. And he hit a point where he couldn't hold that in any longer. And I think, I'm a relationships person. I'm all about trying to know the people that I'm working with. And so I think that to me, first of all, is a glaring thing that teacher was just not in touch with that student and what he needed. And so, in education, it's always a difficult thing to think about, am I doing the right things? And teachers have a lot of things they're balancing, and you're trying to figure it all out. And literally most people that I know are just simply doing the best that they can. And so I always say, when you know better, you do better. So think about that Maya Angelou quote, when you know better, you do better. Sometimes we just don't know better. So to start with in this chapter, one of the things that it's talking about equity and access, but a lot of times equality and equity get used interchangeably, and they're actually different. So equality is the idea that people have equal value and are capable of equal input and outcome. In short, one size fits all. And we've all been in a situation where we've been one size fits all, and it is not comfortable, because that is a fallacy. One size does not fit all.
Right. So on the flip side of that is equity. And so equity is ensuring that everyone has what they need to be successful. So that's a perceived conflict sometimes, because some people see equity as being unfair. Some learners just need more than others to be successful. And maybe those learners need more this time, but then next time there's a different group of learners that will need more. It's not like the same person's always getting more. It's not unfair. It's just what they need. So in UDL, the common phrase is, what is necessary for some is good for all. The important thing to remember is that not all accommodations will be helpful for all learners. However, instructional supports and options should be provided for all.
I think that's such an interesting idea, because it invokes that piece of choice for our students. And for many students, the first time they're presented with that choice, they aren't sure how to handle it, because they've not been in a situation like that before, where they have to figure out what is best for them. So when I think about the idea of choices, that was very appealing to me, because Melissa and I are actually right now in the process of working on our ISTE certified educator, and we are learning all about how to most equitably implement all those strategies. And one of them is about providing choices for our students, choices in how they learn, choices in how they demonstrate their knowledge. And so I have come to embrace this idea of choices. So when we think about UDL in terms of designing our lessons and providing resources to our students, what we need to do is think about, how do we eliminate potential barriers for learning? So if I want my students to learn about a topic, but I know I have some students that are struggling readers, I don't want to provide all reading resources. That's where I could find a video that it explains the same things as the article that I provide. I would have some students that would choose to read, some students that would like the video, and some students that might want to look through several things, or maybe a podcast that they could listen to, because they can multitask while they listen to the podcast. So I love this analogy that it's like providing a buffet of resources for our students, and they choose what best meets their needs to support their learning. Because by providing those supports and those options, our learners are better supported. And then it's got scaffolded resources that are appropriate for learners of all levels. And that's levels the playing field.
Yeah. And so if you I love that, if you think about it like a buffet, and you get to pick and choose from what you like. And if you think about the teacher from that viral video, if the packet was on the buffet, guaranteed there will be some students that would pick that packet. That works for some people, but it doesn't work for all. And so we have to think about our learners making choices. But how do we know that they're going to pick the right things? It's very easy to sit here and assume that we know best and we can choose what students need. So I could say, well, I know that, Diana loves the packet. So I'm just going to give her the packet because I know it works for her. And then I know that Melissa, she won't like the packet. She's going to want to do it in a different way. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give it to her because I know that's what she likes. But that's not what UDL is about. We have to provide students opportunities to make choices because it's not up to what we think, it's what they choose. So by providing them those opportunities and allowing them to make the choices in UDL, blended learning environments, and then allow them to reflect on what they chose, that allows them to be independent learners, which is what we want for them. So there's an end goal on top of the learning, on top of those outcomes, we also are teaching them to be independent.
Yes, I love that. I love that idea. And it's that outcome in mind. When I start with that, then I can provide all that buffet of resources that lets my learners move towards that outcome that I want. And here was something sometimes I think, and I'll be the first to admit, back in my journey many years ago, I was not sure about this equality versus equity thing. Because it's kind of instilled in us that everybody should be fair and everybody gets the same piece of the pie. And I loved, and they're great at providing these analogies and these real world applications or connections in this book. So think about the idea of pizza delivery. What if pizza delivery, it's necessary for somebody that doesn't have transportation? They cannot order a pizza if somebody doesn't bring it to them. But what if we just said, well, you can only order delivery if you don't have transportation? Well,
Diana, don't mess with my pizza.
I know. Yeah, don't get in the way of our pizza. I mean, I live in a small town, but we have lots of pizza options here. So, when we think about this, it's a convenience. I will pay to have pizza delivered to my house to save myself the time of driving in town to pick up the pizza. So same thing. That's convenient for me. It's convenient for everybody. So it's a choice that I make. If I did not have that choice simply because I had a car, that's not equity. Same thing, paying cash or credit cards, another choice. It's important to allow our learners to think about their current circumstances and what is going to best meet them where they are right now. That's equity.
Right. So I love that analogy. It just makes sense. And I'm a person, like, here's an example. I learn through analogies. If there isn't an analogy and I can make one up, I will, because it helps me learn. So like that works for me. Maybe sometimes I say analogies to people and they think, why do you keep doing that? Well, because it puts the learning in my mind. And then next time I think about it. So for this, I will always think about that pizza analogy. So, okay, now this is a little bit more serious than pizza. But in this book, in this chapter, they talk about this new teacher project. And it was in 1997. It was pretty sobering to me. The study focused on diverse school systems. And what they found was that most students, especially those of color and from low-income families, missed out on appropriate instruction and classwork. And so what that caused was 6 months of wasted class time. And they actually gave it a term. It was called the opportunity myth. And it really hit home to me because what it was caused by was teachers who in the study really thought that they were choosing the right materials and instruction for these students. So, it wasn't like a lack, it wasn't a whole group of teachers who weren't doing the right things. They thought they were doing the right things. They were intentional about what they were doing, but because it just wasn't working for those students, the kids were 6 months of wasted class time. And so that was really hard for me to think about. So I think it's definitely a lesson learned.
It is. And when I think about that, that kind of hit home to me because in 1997, I was in the middle of my teacher preparation years. I graduated my undergrad in 99. So I'll let you know that I'm of a certain age. And we were taught you teach to the average. That was kind of, you knew you needed to scaffold to support your struggling learners, and then you could provide some enrichment. But in general, you worked to reach the average student at that point in time. And it was well intentioned. It was not that was just how it was at that time, thought that that's what you were doing, what was right. And we have this universally designed system that had the goal of creating a tier 1 environment that was the least restrictive and the most culturally responsible, trauma-informed teaching environment. But what happens is that these well-meaning environments actually become restrictive because we use a one-size-fits-all pedagogy that seeks to support the average learner. And really what they've discovered is that the average learner is kind of a mythical being. It just doesn't really exist because there are so many differences in our learners. And this is where blended learning and a UDL approach is more equitable for your students, because you're able to provide that buffet of resources that will do a better job of reaching all learners.
Which is exactly what we want for our kids. So there's a quote that really stood out to me, and it said, empathy is the first step to getting toward equity. It's impossible to meet the needs of a person without understanding them. So everything I know and believe about education says that relationships matter most. Not just education, just life. So that this is on that same track. So we have to understand and listen to our learners before we can create learning that truly meets their needs. We have to know our learners before we can educate them. So let's think about everything from the student's point of view when we design our learning environments.
It's so important. So important.
Mm-hmm. And Diana, I know you've done such extensive work on relationships. But Katie Novak co-authored another book, Equity by Design, Delivering on the Promise of Design, which talks about empathy interviews that dive into specific ways that will help students meet their own goals. And then throughout the year, Kogan's, which was a new word for me, that are conversations between the teacher and students, can be used to co-create ways to improve the classroom. And I love that. Like the teacher and the students are developing how the classroom is running, I guess, like as the classroom unfolds. So it's not this teacher-led from the beginning, this is how it is, and this is how it goes. And so implementing all of these strategies will help meet the needs of all students and improve the classroom learning environment. And I can see how that would really benefit student learning just by the fact that it is our classroom. It's not the teacher's classroom. And so that piece of it alone, I just love that.
Me too. And I think, I think sometimes to my time in the classroom and I see what people currently in the classroom they're facing. And I know time is kind of the elephant in the room, that there's never enough time. But if we're designing blended learning environments where our students have choices, we're also buying ourselves time back to meet with these students and to work with them. So you will have students, instead of that one size fits all, where all students are doing the same worksheet or all students are doing the same activity, when you give them those choices and you have students in different places, first of all, it's going to look messy, might even be loud, but it buys you time to kind of get to know those small pockets of students that we've missed out on in the past. Now, something that we do need to talk about is the idea of digital access. And so most of the time, the students have digital access when they're in school. Like here in, I think in Indiana, what was it, the statistic I heard yesterday, 91% of schools are one-to-one now. And that's great. And that means that there's a lot of digital access for our students. But what happens is if it's an online situation like we faced during the pandemic, we find that equitable access to internet is not available at home. Whether it is a socioeconomic issue where we can't afford that digital access, whether it's a situation, I live in a small town, I live out in the country, and we actually have families in our area that can't get reliable cell phone service, which, so internet is a challenge. If you don't have cell phone service, a hotspot isn't even going to do you any good. So those types of access that created and contributed to that learning gap that we had grow and develop during the pandemic. So that highlighted the divide that a lot of our families experienced when we were relying on at-home instruction during the closures. How students continue to learn if they didn't have reliable access to the internet. And so there were a lot of districts that were caught by surprise because previously the digital work would have been completed at school. So that is something that communities are facing. It's not just a school system problem, it's a community challenge that you have to work on addressing. I know, we're talking about infrastructure here in our community and how we make this better, because in 2023, digital access, reliable access to the internet is almost a need rather than a want.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that. And now, it is a need. Equity goes beyond access too. And I think that also was noted during the pandemic. Socioeconomic and differences in families were obvious as students worked from home. Even home environments can come into play if they're not conducive to working from home. Some students might not have a space that they can work, and that might even affect getting work complete, or if there's sharing of devices. Not all schools have one-to-one take-home devices. So, all of those things. Is there somebody to supervise them and help them with their work? All of those things come into play with getting their work done. Mm-hmm. So we're still seeing some of those effects if there's work that's coming home for homework, or if a student is out. But it definitely has brought some of those conversations to the surface. It's a different world post-pandemic. In my naive brain, it was like, well, when the pandemic is over, well, when we get back to normal, and that hasn't happened. It's a new normal, and every year I feel like, okay, well, this year it will be a breather, and it just feels like every year there's just something else. So it's been interesting. And so more, the good news is I feel like we're doing more and more to support students, and all of this plays into that.
Absolutely. And, some of these conversations that have to be had are difficult and uncomfortable conversations, and nobody loves to be involved in those, but they're so necessary to start a transformation of our systems. And so the inequalities that exist in education because of equity or access, because of one-size-fits-all strategies that we cling to because they're comfortable for us, but may not be so comfortable for our students. Because we need to work on transitioning our education from just talking to the kids to being more interactive and having this applied learning. And I see that focus, that shift to problem-based learning and project-based learning. And so one of the things that came about in the chapter that I thought was really interesting was the, I'm going to botch this, but it's like INACOL Blended Learning Teacher Competency Framework. And it can come into play. And there were 3 principles to this framework that I thought were really valuable when applied to blended learning teachers. So number 1, blended learning teachers must have a strong commitment to high expectations and high equitable outcomes for all learners. And I think it's easy for us to move that benchmark of expectations, and we need to keep those high expectations, even if it's a struggle for our students. And then we just have to provide the scaffolds to help them meet those expectations. Blended learning teachers must have a desire to move toward a competency-based approach to education. And because that, when you start with that, like theory of backward design or learning by understanding, you start with that competency in mind and you design the learning strategies that are going to help those students achieve that competency. And so that's where it's easier to provide choices in the learning and choices in how they demonstrate their knowledge. And then blended learning teachers must value all students, including those with different skills, exceptionalities, and needs. And we see that more and more. I have a cousin who has some exceptionalities, and he is thriving in some of his classes that he gets to participate in because his teachers are so wonderful about including him and having those expectations. And it's been a real pleasure to watch him grow. He still encounters challenges from time to time, and teachers that maybe aren't as comfortable providing the accommodations and his needs, meeting his needs. But to watch him change and grow throughout his high school years has really been inspiring to me, because I know in his younger years, he had a lot of challenges. So the key to success in this is that a blended learning teacher understands there are different inputs that students need in order to achieve the desired outcomes. And it really highlights the importance of teachers knowing their students. It goes back to those relationships that I'm so passionate about, because we can't understand somebody unless we kind of understand the shoes that they're walking in, so that they have exactly what they need to survive.
Yep. And our students come to us with all kinds of diversity. They have differences in their identities and strengths and limitations, and designing those flexible learning options for them shows that they are valued. And then taking it a step further, we can embrace their funds of knowledge, which I like that phrase, which is defined as the historically accumulated and culturally developed bodies of knowledge and skills essential for household or individual functioning and well-being. So let's allow our students to share what they can do and embrace their cultural and family differences. So basically that's what that's saying. It's like, let's find ways to bring all of that into the classroom. We're embracing that. And so if we can show respect towards our students' differences, we can also see that learners have differences in their learning needs as well. I really like the way that the authors connected the respect toward cultural and family differences in learning I really like the way that the authors connected the respect towards cultural and family differences to differences in learning. And I think that we can respect and honor all differences. And if we're modeling that respect, then students are going to learn from that, and they're going to carry that forward towards respecting others in all walks of life.
And that's our goal, to prepare students for whatever exists outside of their educational lives. And we want them to be high functioning citizens that contribute whatever profession they go into, whatever their meaning is. So if we can help them start on that path early, we're really just putting the power in their hands.
Love this chapter.
I did too. So we're kind of coming close to the end of our time together. And so as we start to wrap up, we want to leave you with a couple of things to think about. So as we reflect back, the chapter discusses the differences between equity and equality. And in your own words, think about the difference between the two concepts. And then think about your practices in your learning environment that were focused on equality and those that align more with equity. And then even to take it one step further, how can you provide more equitable access and options for your students? So as we conclude chapter 2, we want to invite you. Well, first of all, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey through UDL and blended learning. And we want to invite you to keep coming back. We've got 7 more chapters to go. And we're going to be bringing in some special guests to join us from the Keep Indiana Learning world that have some knowledge and some passions to contribute to the topics at hand. It's not too late. You can secure your copy of UDL and Blended Learning from Amazon or your local bookstore, whatever way you choose to access it. Chapter 2's episode is going to air 2 weeks from today. But as always, you can choose to just bank this and tackle it all at once later. If you want this, the QR code there on the screen is just a direct link to the YouTube playlist of all of these videos. So thank you again so much for taking time and joining us. We can't wait to see you next time.